Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something you literally see every single day, probably without giving it a second thought: tattoos. Whether it's a stunning custom sleeve or, one of those questionable tribal designs from the late 90s, we aren't just going to look at them as ink on skin, and we aren't just looking at them as art either. We're examining tattoos as a fascinating lens into human behavior. Through a sociological perspective, we're going to explore how these permanent marks are actually incredibly dynamic social symbols. So get ready, because we are about to look at the stories written on our skin in a completely different way.
Okay, let's dive into this with a question almost anyone with a tattoo has been asked. Or, well, anyone without a tattoo has probably wondered, what does your tattoo mean? It's a universally recognizable question, and it's our ultimate hook into the topic today. Because wrapped up in this seemingly simple, everyday question is actually a massive web of social expectations, identity building, and cultural assumptions.
To figure out why that question is so loaded, we need to look at the core academic theory framing our source material today. It's called Symbolic Interactionism. Rooted in the work of sociologists like Mead, Bloomer, and Goffman, this theory basically argues that we act based on the meanings things hold for us. And crucially, those meanings don't just exist in a vacuum, they emerge entirely from social processes. Our source points out that tattoos are an absolutely perfect site for examining this concept in everyday life. The ink doesn't just sit there, right? It interacts with the world, and as you'll see, it interacts with you.
That brings us to Section 1, More Than Just Ink, looking at the micro-level conversations. We're going to start small here, zooming in on those direct one-on-one interactions where the meaning of a tattoo is actually built.
Think back to that question. What does your tattoo mean? When someone asks you this, they're bringing a micro-level cultural assumption right to the table. The assumption that a tattoo must carry some sort of deep personal significance. There's a real contrast in approaches here. On one side, you've got individuals who embrace the narrative completely. They offer deep stories of loss, love, or personal transformation. But on the flip side, some people actively resist it. They might insist their tattoo is purely aesthetic, like, hey, I just really like the design. But here's the thing. Whether you embrace the expectation of deep meaning or completely resist it, you are actively participating in a micro-level conversation that negotiates dominant cultural scripts.
Moving right along to our second section, the socially produced self and how we incorporate ink into our identity. Let's see how this plays out on an individual level.
And this brilliantly illustrates the idea from sociologist Mead, who proposed that the self is actually socially produced. A tattoo becomes part of the self because it's incorporated into how an individual understands who they are and how they wish to be seen by the world. But here's the kicker. Because it depends on others, the meaning is never fixed. Imagine a small wrist tattoo. It's a single static object, right? But the interpretation completely changes depending on the viewer. To the wearer's peers, it might simply be seen as fashionable. To an employer, it might be interpreted as unprofessional. And to a parent, it might be seen as a sign of rebellion. The source material emphasizes that each of these completely different interpretations feeds right back into the wearer's sense of self. The reactions of the peers, the employer, the parent, they actively reinforce or reshape the meaning the individual attaches to their own tattoo.
Let's zoom out slightly further now for our third section, the tattoo performance and managing the expressive resource.
Here we bring in Erving Goffman's dramaturgical approach. Goffman viewed social life as a literal theatrical performance, breaking it down into a front stage versus a backstage. In this context, tattoos act as expressive resources in the performance of identity. Think about two very different settings. On the front stage, let's say a teacher at a parents' evening. The individual might choose to conceal their tattoos to manage professional impressions. But on the backstage, that same teacher hanging out with friends, the tattoos are fully revealed. The person shifts between performances, proving that tattoos aren't static identity markers, but incredibly flexible symbols deployed differently across different social contexts.
Which leads us to this absolutely vital takeaway. Covering a tattoo does not erase its meaning. Actually, scratch that, it's quite the opposite. When that teacher rolls down their sleeves for parents' evening, that specific act of covering up actually demonstrates the individual's active awareness of social expectations. It shows they're actively taking a role in negotiating those expectations. Deploying these flexible symbols strategically proves just how socially attuned the wearer really is. Now we step back to look at the biggest picture in Section 4, shifting cultural meanings and the macro shift in society. Sociologist Herbert Bloomer argued that meanings aren't inherent to an object. They emerge through collective definition over time. And honestly, there is perhaps no better example of this than the history of tattoos. It's fascinating to see how this cultural evolution builds over time. In past eras, tattoos were heavily associated with deviance and criminality. Think of sailors or gang members, but these weren't natural associations. They were socially constructed and reinforced by media and law enforcement. Then, moving into the late 20th century, the boundaries shifted to subcultural resistance, like the punk movement, right? And finally, look at the present day. Tattooing has become far more mainstream, signifying creativity, individuality, and even wellness culture. The exact same tattoo, whether it's a full sleeve or a delicate line art piece, carries radically different meanings today than it would have 50 years ago, all depending on the cultural moment and the collective definition of society.
But this meaning-making doesn't just happen at the grand societal level. It happens within specific communities as well. Tattoos function heavily as symbols of group identity. Members of subcultures like bikers, religious groups, or LGBTQ+ communities use tattoos to signal belonging. But as the source notes, even within these groups, meanings aren't universally interpreted. For instance, a single rainbow tattoo within an LGBTQ+ community might be read as a symbol of pride, a mark of solidarity, or even a statement of political resistance. It relies entirely on the interactional context and the shared understandings of the people in that specific moment. Bringing our explainer full circle, we arrive at our final section, the interactional ritual. After looking at society, subcultures, and everyday conversations, we're going right back to the most intimate setting of the whole shebang, the inside of the tattoo studio, the actual moment the ink is applied.
The tattooing process itself is a profound interactional ritual. It's really not just a transaction where a service is rendered. The ritual begins with the relationship between the artist and the client, negotiating the design, the size, and the placement. Through this negotiation, step 2 occurs. The studio becomes a space where identity is collaboratively constructed between two people. Finally, step 3 is the transformative social ritual itself. The moment of being tattooed is often experienced as deeply transformative, not because the physical ink has some sort of inherent magic power, but because the social ritual of getting it done actually imbues that ink with significance.
So, the crucial point is summarized perfectly in this quote from our source material. Tattoos are socially situated acts of meaning-making. They're dynamic symbols embedded in relationships. Their meanings are created through interaction. They are shaped by massive cultural narratives, and they're continually renegotiated every single day as individuals perform and reinterpret their identities on the front stages and back stages of their lives. They are never merely personal expressions. They are always fundamentally social.
Which leaves us with this final thought to consider. If the meaning of a tattoo changes based on who's looking at it, the era you live in, and the questions people ask you about it, who really gets to decide what your skin says about you? How much of our deepest, most permanent personal identity is actually being shaped by the people around us? It's a really fascinating question to ponder the next time you see a flash of ink. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.